when they came up with okay. Okay, I've got it. But they came up with a quite a lengthy definition of what is food sovereignty, and they defined it as the right of peoples to healthy, culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods. And also the other key part of it, the right of people to define their own food and agricultural systems. And then there's a whole lot of other clauses that follow that, because they see it as very much interrelated with land rights, with agrarian reform, with gender relations, with community building. So they saw it as very much as transformational. Was the way that they defined it, and it was kind of moving away from the colonial patterns of agriculture to actually coming up with a whole new definition of food production and food systems. And I mean, it's actually, it occurred to me, kind of reading through some of this, it's actually taking control of the means of production, that at a very local level. But I think another really important principle of La Via Campesina, and given the scope of it in so many countries, in so many different political contexts, in so many places globally, there is a set of principles. But it's absolutely the fact that that it is interpreted in different ways in different places according to the local context. And if you look at the situation in Latin America, for example, one of the biggest movements in La Via Campesina is the MST, the landless workers movement in Brazil, that was actually set up in 1982. Extraordinary movement, but enormous. I mean, they've got millions, literally millions of participants, but they actually started off as a way of mobilizing people to reclaim land. Through settlements and occupying land occupations, and then working to try and have that land legalized, and then moving on from there. Well, what do we do with the land? But that's very different from a situation in Nicaragua, where there has been a revolution, there has been a agrarian reform in the 1980s, but it's very much been continued since the Sandinistas came back into power in 2007. There's a massive land reform program, there's urban reform and rural reform. And that's kind of total contrast to the situation in Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador, for example. So the Via Campesina organizations in those particular places will be at a very different point in their struggle and will adopt different methods for a very different context. So just to move on a little bit, just to talk about the example of the ATC in Nicaragua, it was one of the mass movements that was formed in the 1970s that was part of the insurrection against the Somoza dictatorship. So it was an organization that was formed to reflect the interests of the rural sector, which at the time it was horrendous problems with hunger, illiteracy, low salaries, exploitation of rural workers, campesinos without land, no access to basic services. So they were very much part of the wider movement led by the Frente Sandinista that led to the overthrow of the Somoza dictatorship. And then throughout the 1980s, the ATC organizations were very much the driving, one of the driving forces behind the movement to set up cooperatives, the movement to set up state farms, the movement in the countryside for basic services. But also they were very much at the forefront of the war against the Contra forces that were being driven by the United States. Because the Contra forces were coming across the border from Honduras into rural areas of northern Nicaragua. So the members of the ATC were very much members of the local militia, actually defending their communities, what they had gained as a result of the revolution. That was being destroyed by US interests. So they had a dual function at that time. Then just to move on, no, the ATC today, I think that, well, during that neoliberal period from 1990 to 2007, they were very much at the forefront of kind of defending the gains of the revolution, but in the countryside. So the areas of work that they're involved in today are very kind of wide-reaching. I mean, their organization of about 40,000 people. Their areas of work are political, they're technical, and they're professional. So I'll just give you some examples of the work that they're doing in each of those areas. Probably one of the most outstanding examples is a Institute for Agroecology that they have established in Chontales, which is about 3 hours drive outside Managua, going over towards the Caribbean coast. They've got 160 hectares of land. And it's a mixture. It's some pastoral land, it's some forest, it's quite heavily forested. There's a river that flows through the middle of it. It's traditionally it's in the middle of a very, very intense cattle growing area. So I mean, very, very destructive of the environment for all the reasons we're very, very familiar with. So in 2017, they set up this institute to train younger people, not just from Nicaragua, but from right across Central America, and also the Dominican Republic and Mexico. So they've had cohorts of students who do a two-year course. So it's technical training in agroecology and land management and animal husbandry, but it's a very, very intense training in political training, but it's political training, but it's political organizing as well. They are accredited by INATEC, which is the Nicaraguan professional accreditation body. So at the end of the 2-year course, they do get a professional training, which particularly maybe not so much for students from Nicaragua, but certainly from other parts of the region, that qualification is actually really, really important to them. There's some very interesting components of what they're doing there. they have this concept that I think probably for via campesino organizations in general, is a concept of territoriality. So they are actually working really, really closely with campesinos in neighboring areas to the Institute, and working with them. But it's a kind of two-way exchange of kind of knowledge and experience. Because one of the things that they do in La Via Campesina is try and recover traditional ways of farming. I mean, obviously, making it relevant to the situation in which we live today. But there's a lot of learning from indigenous practices, particularly to do with things like kind of soil conservation, about the relationship between people and the environment. And lots of techniques that have been lost in this kind of big drive for so-called modernization through the corporates. With the younger people as well, they do a lot of training on what they call added value, and also in some of the cooperatives that are part of the ATC, because they're saying, well, it's not good enough to just be saying to younger people, well, you'll be going out in the fields and harvesting maize and beans just like we did or our grandparents did. So they're also looking at kind of adding value to products that they're producing in the countryside. And there's a whole network of in urban areas, a whole network of local markets where people can go into the towns and the cities and actually sell their produce. And that's also a way of community building, because a lot of what La Via Campesina and the ATC, well, the ATC is part of it, are promoting is trying to create a circular economy. So it's circular for the environment. So everything that's produced is reused and recycled. But circular in kind of creating markets, which are also part of kind of strengthening or building the social fabric, given the importance of markets, particularly in places like Nicaragua. The other areas that the ATC are working on, they are working with local organizations, or local farming organizations, on building cooperatives. One particular cooperative that I visited when I was in Nicaragua was a women's cooperative, which is kind of south of Managua. So there's a cooperative of 17 women. So each of them have got their own parcels of land or family parcels of land. So they're growing coffee, which is exported to the US, but they're growing, well, kind of every kind of possible vegetable or fruit that you can, or tree that you can imagine that would grow in a tropical country. They're doing a lot of training on things like composting, on also trying to encourage agroforestry as well. That's kind of linked to everything they're producing. And also they have a training program for the younger people in the co-op, and looking at ways in which trying to, well, it's the struggle that there is absolutely globally, how to encourage younger people to actually stay on the land, and prevent this draw to the city, or in the case of countries in Central America, the big draw for people to go off to the US. So they're putting a huge amount of effort into training, but looking at ways to encourage people to stay on the land, to take pride in the land. Okay, and the other thing that the ATC is doing, they have quite a lot of experimental plots in different parts of Nicaragua, particularly in Esteli in northern Nicaragua, where they're experimenting with different techniques of composting or growing different kinds of fruit, or yes, it's kind of generally experimental plots, but with the idea of just taking the example of those particular plots or those particular farmers, but actually looking at, how do you broaden that message to other farmers in the area? So it's the idea of territoriality again. The other area that the ATC works on is obviously Nicaragua is a mixed economy. There are still large farms there, owned mostly by Nicaraguan interests, but some by foreign interests as well. So in Esteli, for example, there are a lot of tobacco farms where they're producing cigars. So the ATC is actually working with the laborers, both the laborers on the tobacco farms, but also in the tobacco factories. So that part of their work is all around kind of employment rights. And everything connected with employment rights and working conditions, etc. Also, there are some big coffee plantations. So they're all in Matagalpa, for example, they're working with some of the laborers on the coffee plantations. Perhaps just to go back to the La Via Campesina, because they campaigned for years and decades in the 80s and 90s around the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. And one of the things that they were pushing was for some international declaration of the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. That was finally, after years of struggle, was finally agreed by the UN in the end of 2018. It's an really important declaration. Not signed by everybody. Britain did not sign it. The US did not sign it, etc., etc. Australia did not sign it. It was a really, really important framework for determining the right, providing a kind of international convention that obviously is not legally binding. It's a useful tool for La Via Campesina and other organizations to use, but it was a huge, huge struggle in most part of the implementation of it. This year is a really big year for La Via Campesina and for the ATC in particular, because in Managua in November, they're hosting an international or global gathering of representatives from all parts of La Via Campesina. They're expecting about 400 representatives, and it'll be a week-long meeting. And that will be to debate the progress that they made, but look at plans for the coming 3 years. It'll be a massive logistical challenge, and also it'll be held in a number of different languages. They make decisions by consensus, so it'll be an extraordinary time and a really, really critical time for the movement.
Can I just interrupt? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good,
Yes.
lovely. Okay. I've just put a message that we've got less than 2 minutes. So can we all leave and come back in again, please?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So press end and
Use
then
the
come
same
back
login.
in.
Okay. All right.